Welcome to Episode 8 of The Seed by Dan Thomas, published in 1967, adapted for Sci-Fi radio theater production by Galen Porter. In our last episode, Alice was initiated into the coven. Her mind swam, trying to absorb the material. She wished she had some facilities to take notes. Madelaine revealed the mysteries of the earth to Apprentice Witch Alice. Order was brought out of chaos. Man became the full expression of free will. But the delights of man corrupted the soul. The conscious crowded the subconscious into unawareness. The origin of the soul has been forgotten. Religions have turned to the problems of man and away from the problems of the soul. Only a vague memory of the universal experience has kept knowledge of the soul alive. We who share this ancient knowledge have a duty to preserve these truths until events of the world make their general acceptance again possible. The next week, Wyn-No-Nah called and asked, "How would you like to get a first-hand report from the empire of the Incas, 3 centuries before Columbus set out in his 3 little buckets?" Dr. Brandon had agreed to allow Alice to hear some of the previous tapes. Alice explained to Dr. Brandon that she was seeking to collect all pertinent data on human experience and to reduce it to computer terms to determine man's purpose, and that she considered Wyn-No-Nah's evidence of reincarnation a valuable part of the whole. Join us tonight for Episode 8 as Alice listens to the tapes. He stopped the tape, then pushed another button. Alice recognized Brandon's voice.
Now you are going back even further into the past. We are going back to the time when you were 5 years old. 5 years old. When I next speak to you, you will remember yourself as you were when you were 5. Now you are 5. Do you remember yourself when you were 5?
After a brief pause, a small, childlike voice answered.
Yes.
Alice would not have recognized her voice. It was slightly higher, tense and raspy.
Fine. Do you go to school now?
Yes.
What grade are you in?
Primary.
How do you get to school?
Walk.
How far is it from your home to your school?
I don't know. Not far. Some of the big kids ride the bus.
Brandon seemed puzzled.
The small children walk and the big children ride the bus?
Yes. They go to town, to the big school.
Oh, I see. You go to the small country school, and they go to the big school in town.
Yes.
Fine. How many grades are there at your school?
8. I am in primary.
I see. How many rooms does your school have?
I don't know.
Again, Brandon seemed puzzled.
Don't you know how the school building looks inside?
Yes. It could be one, but they could pull doors across. Then there would be 2.
Oh, I see. Fine. Now, do you know any boys in your school that you especially liked?
Rather hurriedly, Brandon stopped the machine, but not quickly enough to stop the next word.
Yes.
The voice spoke just before the machine severed the final sibilant. Brandon pushed the fast-forward button, and the tapes whirled.
You see, most of this is pretty dull stuff. We go through this sort of thing to get the patient relaxed, deep in the hypnotic state, and emotionally secure before we go over the hump. I'll roll it on back to about age 2, just before I take her over the hump.
He stopped the machine, pushed another button, and his recorded voice resumed.
Now, you are 2 years old. 2 years old. Do you remember yourself as you were at 2?
Yes.
The voice now was even higher, with an infantile lack of enunciation.
What are you doing in this memory of yourself at 2?
Taking a nap.
I see. You have laid down to take a nap, but you are not asleep?
No.
I see. But you are lying down. What is going on around you?
I hear sounds. Mama in the kitchen. Hot. The door is open. The wind makes a funny sound blowing through the screen. There are flies buzzing and walking on the screen. I am watching them. There's another buzzing far off a tractor. I hear the tractor. It's Daddy plowing with the tractor in the field.
All right. Fine. Now, we are going back even further in time. Back beyond the time when you were 2. Beyond the time when you were 1. We keep going back. Back. Further in time. Further and further back. And as strange as it may seem, you can remember another time and place, another life. You can remember another life before this one. And when I speak to you again, you will remember yourself in this other life. Now, now, now you remember yourself in this other life. Now you remember yourself in this other life. Do you know how old you are?
16.
Fine. You are 16 years old in this other life. Where do you live?
Cusco.
Where?
Cusco.
I see.
Brandon's voice betrayed that he didn't.
Do you live in town or in the country?
The city. Cusco.
I see. Fine. Is it a large city?
Oh, yes. The biggest. Biggest in all the world.
I see. Fine. What country is it in?
After a long pause, the reply was hesitant.
I don't know the name. It is called the Four Quarters.
I see. The Four Quarters. And what is your name?
Sumac Nusta.
Sumac Nusta?
My baby name.
Sumac Nusta. That is a pretty name.
It means pretty girl.
The strange voice said in a burst of immodesty.
Pretty girl. Wonderful. And what do you do? Do you go to school?
Of course. I'm an Inca. I must.
The voice took on an arrogant tone.
Yes, all of the royal family must go to school. Learn all there is to know, for they must govern the people.
I see. And who teaches you these things?
Amatus, of course.
Amatus. What does that mean?
It means those who know, the wise ones.
In this other life, you are an Inca, and you study under the wise ones. What do you study?
Oh, many things. The laws of the Incas, how to speak properly, how to dress properly, how to worship, the history of the Incas. The girls learn the arts of womanhood, raising children properly, healing, and medicine. The boys learn the art of war and how to rule by the laws of the Incas.
I see. Do you study from books?
No, not books, not in string.
I don't understand. Knots and string?
Yes, each color string. Each knot has meaning.
I see. You are 16 years old, a member of the royal Inca family. You have any brothers or sisters?
Oh, yes.
How many?
I don't know, more than I can count.
Does your father have many wives?
Of course. The Koya, my mother, then many Paula, wives of royal blood, and many not of royal blood, the Mamakuna.
I see. You are 16. Are you married?
Oh, no.
Are you still a virgin?
Of course. I would be buried alive if I were not, and no one would ever speak my name again. The Koya Nusta must remain pure until she becomes Koya queen.
All right. Fine.
Brandon's voice spoke slowly and soothingly.
Now, let us go forward in this life. When you were a princess in the Inca Empire, let us move forward in time until you are 18. Until you are 18. Until you are 18 in the Inca Empire. Now you are 18. 18 in the Inca Empire. Are you still living in Cusco?
Yes,
I see. Are you married now?
yes, I am Koya.
Fine. Now you are the queen. And what is your name now?
Runtu,
And what does that mean?
egg or egg color. I have very light skin.
See, you are Runtu, the queen. And what is your husband's name?
Inca Viracocha.
Inca Viracocha. Is he of the royal family too?
Of course. He's Tora, my brother.
You are married to your brother?
Yes, that is the law of the Incas.
I see. What reason do they give for this law?
The heir to the throne must marry his eldest sister, so that the new heir will inherit the legacy of the first Inca without the taint of common blood. Only the Inca may do this.
Do you love your husband?
Oh, yes,
Does he have other wives?
The voice grew defensive.
of course, he is the Inca. He must increase the royal lineage so that there always will be leaders capable of carrying out the Inca's commands.
Do you feel strange sometimes, married to your brother?
A long pause. Then the voice said quietly,
It is the law of the Incas.
All right. Now let us go still further forward in time until you are...
Brandon snapped off the machine. They sat for several seconds in silence. Alice's brain was numb from straining to catch all the subtle nuances of the tape. She felt a strange, subdued excitement. Although she planned to check out every possible detail, there was little doubt in her mind. The voice, every inflection, was convincing. She remembered what Madelaine had said. The conscious memory is a record of this life, and the subconscious is the record of the soul through many lives. There was a pattern, and the pattern was repetition. Again, Brandon was studying Alice, awaiting her reaction.
Very interesting.
Alice attempted to match the doctor's objectivity.
Have you checked out any of the details historically?
Some, which brings up a rather pertinent point. Most of the writing on the Incas was by the conquistadores and the priests who accompanied them. They did not know the language and did not bother to learn it. Their writing was filled with inaccuracies, and the errors have been perpetuated. The only real, authentic history of the Incas is by Garcilaso de la Vega, who was born of an Inca princess, sired by a conquistador captain 8 years after the conquest.
He paused as Alice made notes.
This man, Garcilaso, was reared as a member of the royal family. Most of them had been slaughtered by then, but went to Spain at about 20 and received an old world education. He wrote 2 big volumes, Royal Commentaries of the Incas, to put history straight. As far as I can determine, much of those 2 volumes is not available in English until a full year after Wyn-No-Nah's tapes were made. The detail in the tapes dovetail perfectly with Garcilaso. Yet, Wyn-No-Nah does not know Spanish or any language in which the full text was available. I have tested her under hypnosis and sodium pentothal. If she had been doing research, it seems, she would have picked up some of the historical inaccuracies that are common coin, errors made by many accomplished historians.
Then there is proof.
Well, let's just say that the similarities are very interesting, but certainly not conclusive from a scientific point of view.
Did you find any evidence of an Inca queen named Runtu or an Inca named Viracocha?
Oh yes, Viracocha was the 8th Inca, and probably the greatest, judging from Garcilaso's descriptions of his exploits. While still a prince, he saved the empire from an uprising in a battle that left more than 30,000 dead, according to Garcilaso. Wyn-No-Nah describes it in one tape. He also apparently was somewhat of a mystic, this Viracocha, given to visions and prophecies. He predicted the arrival of the Spanish. And his sister wife, Runtu, was popular with the people. Incidentally, Garcilaso mentions her light complexion, which apparently was something of an exception.
Alice made notes.
And this doesn't seem sufficient proof?
Brandon wrestled with his pipe.
Well, let's just say it's very interesting. You remember, many critics claimed after the Bridie Murphy publicity that subjects may cooperate with the hypnotist, utilizing material picked up earlier in this life.
Do you think that is the case with Wyn-No-Nah?
Oh, of course it's possible. Understand that I am not convinced either way. I try to keep an open mind.
Have any of the details been in error?
Not that I have found.
Then everything has checked out? Doesn't that sound convincing?
Well, let's remember that we also have proof of the patient's background. Her early environment may have contained some influences we know nothing about. Let's not jump to conclusions.
It infuriates me that we should have to. Good Lord, why hasn't more experimentation been done in this field?
Well, I think you have to remember that Wyn-No-Nah is a very unusual subject. She is exceptionally responsive under hypnosis. Most subjects speak only in monosyllables. Most of my colleagues are reluctant to accept results of age regression at all.
Why?
Probably for that reason to begin with, poor subject response. Then there does seem to be that element of patient cooperation and eagerness to please the hypnotist, which may tend to color the accuracy of the results. Also, you often tend to get responses indiscriminately from all age levels, confusing the results further. All these things must be taken into consideration, I feel, to arrive at any evaluation.
And what about age regression to prior existences? Why hasn't that been explored?
Well, to a certain degree it has. And we must remember that it is only a theory at best. Few subjects are equal to the phenomenon, able to go over the hump. And often when they do, it seems to be into a sort of limbo existence, difficult to evaluate. Also, of course, there is a natural reluctance on the part of the profession to pioneer in this field.
Why?
Oh, my. Experimenting with the possibility of prior lives tampers with most every religion in the country and most of the scientific establishment. I must admit that the field apparently has some interesting potentials, but that in itself would seem to be a tremendous problem. For instance, we exist in our religious concept of one life, then reward or punishment. But if it were proven that this is only one inning in a rather long ball game, well, Pandora's box would be opened again. I should think the results might be terrible to contemplate.
But isn't there any scientific statement in support of this phenomenon? Enough to give further experiments some sanction?
Brandon thought about the question for a moment, then reached up to select a volume from the bookshelf beside his desk. He thumbed through it briefly, found the page, and leaned forward under the desk lamp.
This is a two-part essay by Ian Stevenson. He is chairman of the Department of Neurology and Psychiatry at the University of Virginia's School of Medicine. And this essay was published in
He turned to check the footnotes.
the Journal of the American Society for Psychical Research in April and July of 1960. It is entitled The Evidence for Survival from Claimed Memories of Former Incarnations. And I quote, "Further investigation of apparent memories of former incarnation may well establish reincarnation as the most probable explanation of the experiences."
Brandon lowered the book and stared thoughtfully at his pipe.
I should think that is about as strong a statement as you are going to get out of a medical man at the present time.
He apparently made the observation as much to himself as to Alice. On Sunday, after taking the usual precaution of shooting through the freeway Mixmaster a dozen times, Alice drove out to see Wyn-No-Nah, ostensibly to return her books, specifically to discuss them with her. They spent most of the afternoon going over the legends and myths, with Wyn-No-Nah explaining subtle points that had escaped Alice. Still, she was dissatisfied. She felt a growing desperation. Time was running out, and she couldn't find all the questions yet, let alone the answers. She tried to explain this to Wyn-No-Nah.
But this is all theory. I need facts, concrete, irrefutable data.
I thought that was why you wanted my experiences.
They are only representative of a pattern. I need an environment of many cases like yours as control, as a fixed point of reference. You mentioned once that your talents are far from unique. Do you have any information of others?
I've spent most of last 3 years preparing for that question.
She told her then of the life of Edgar Cayce, the Virginia Beach clairvoyant she had mentioned once before. She described how before his death in 1945, Cayce amassed detailed records of more than 30,000 diagnoses of illness by extrasensory means while under hypnosis. She lent her a copy of Thomas Sugrew's biography of Cayce, There Is a River, containing the highlights of the files now at the Association for Research and Enlightenment at Virginia Beach. Alice wished that she could turn a computer loose on the Cayce files, but she knew that there was not enough time to program the material painstakingly collected over more than 40 years. Wyn-No-Nah also told her of other healing clairvoyants, including a record of the first person ever hypnotized, a young shepherd boy named Victor in 1784. The Marquis de Puységur, a student of Mesmer, discovered that the boy could diagnose illnesses of others while under hypnosis. There were records of many of these somnambulists, Wyn-No-Nah said, and they became a fad in 18th century Europe.
In fact, there was one with a career almost as long as Cayce's, right here in America. Ever hear of Andrew Jackson Davis? He practiced in Orange County, New York for more than 35 years and wrote a book of his experiences.
She hunted in her shelves until she found it, The Principles of Nature, Her Divine Revelations, and A Voice to Mankind. She told Alice of other notable cases, such as the Watseka Wonder, a case chronicled by a Watseka, Illinois doctor, E.W. Steffens, in 1897, and later studied by William James. The body of an Illinois girl, Laurency Benham, was possessed by the spirit of another girl, Mary Roth, who had been dead for 12 years. Steffens witnessed and tested the transformation, which was so complete that Loranci went to live with the dead girl's parents for a time. All these mystic experiences were connected, Wyn-No-Nah insisted, all the way back to the ancient oracles. She pulled out a volume of Plutarch and read to her the details about the famed Delphic oracle. Apparently, a series of women who sat on a stool above a crack in the earth and gave highly accurate prophecies for more than 400 years.
It's a tradition as old as humanity itself. If so many people believed it so long, there must be something in it. Can't you accept that?
Whether I believe it or not is of no consequence. I must make a scientific approach. If there is one faulty bit in the whole program, the results will be off. I can't feed anything into the program that I suspect. I have to know.
You scientists make me sick. Casey's genius was wasted just because a bunch of doctors were jealous of the few doctors who did believe in him and of his abilities. Where's the proof, they ask, when every case he handled was proof? Look at the intelligent people who have known. Charles Dickens was obsessed with the reality of his characters, hunted by them, and he had many experiences of precognition. Abraham Lincoln had mystic experiences throughout his life and had dreams foretelling his own death. Jung and Freud had mystic experiences, especially Jung. His mother was considered a witch and stood guard when Jung's father wrote his sermons, because otherwise he was plagued by visitations from the spirit world. Jung's cousin was a clairvoyant and put Jung in contact with his grandfather so completely that Jung came to feel he was living in 2 centuries. A hell of a feeling, I can tell you. President Roosevelt talked with a clairvoyant. Warren Harding's wife consulted with a spiritualist. Mackenzie, King of Canada, was deeply involved in psychic research. Victoria kept in contact with Albert after his death. And even Gladstone was a believer, as were Spinoza, Ibsen, Sir Walter Scott, Schopenhauer, John Masefield, Swinburne, Longfellow, Whitman, Caesar, Pythagoras, Plato, Virgil, Cicero, Victor Hugo, Thomas Huxley, Donne, Goethe, Milton. Oh, hell, Professor, the list is endless. Most great minds are open minds, and this material demands explanation.
I'm not seeking proof for myself. I need it for the machines.
What kind of proof can there be when you're dealing with intangibles? Scientifically, our brains are made up of dead material, as inert as the wood in this table. Yet we have intelligence, vitality. If science is so damn smart, let science explain that.
Electric impulses, all in balance, not unlike a computer.
Science can't even explain electricity. Science can't explain any of the major forces in this world. Gravity, light, electricity, radio waves, all are invisible, so they can't explain them.
But they conform to certain laws. We can measure them, direct them, control them.
You can now, but a few years ago, no one could. Perhaps someday science will discover that there is a soul, that some kind of antimatter or something does leave the body at death. What are we supposed to do? Sit around and wait until the soul gets the official sanction of science before we're all allowed to believe in it?
No, but I must have something physical, something I can measure and evaluate.
Wyn-No-Nah thought about that for a while before replying.
How far would you be willing to go? Would you be willing to take a trip yourself?
I've tried. I have no talent for it.
Wyn-No-Nah smiled knowingly.
I think we might manage something. A little primitive, perhaps, but something.
Brandon let them into his office shortly after midnight. He seemed even quieter and more thoughtful than he had been with Alice the night before. He led them through the front offices into a small room at the rear, furnished with a waist-high couch, a stool, 2 utility tables, and 2 chairs. He perched himself on the stool and gestured them into the chairs facing him.
It's good to see you again.
He fiddled with his pipe.
I've been thinking a good deal about you. Perhaps I was wrong in breaking off our experiments.
Wyn-No-Nah smiled.
I was under the impression that it was I who got cold feet.
No,
Brandon sucked on his pipe.
no, I felt we might be getting in beyond our depth. Beyond my depth, at least. And you seem to have your problems well in hand.
He glanced at Alice.
I don't mind the professors hearing you discuss my case. I've committed myself to science.
Well, it later occurred to me that we might not have gone back far enough. Perhaps the seat of your problems lies even further back than we have explored.
And still another life? Even before the Incas?
Possibly. Of course, we don't know that we are on the right track at all, but if what seems apparent is valid, it may explain why you had no incarnation between 1362 and 1933.
What could be the reason?
Alice directed her question to Wyn-No-Nah to establish herself as a participant without challenging the doctor's reluctance to include her.
The law of karma. Each life is either a step forward or a step backward from the perfection required to return to the Godhead.
Of course, that is only a theory, but if we would accept reincarnation, then it would seem there might be a law of cause and effect, something akin to karma.
But the long period without incarnation came after the Inca lifetime. If that long time out of circulation were punishment, doesn't it seem that she found up in that life?
Brandon studied his pipe.
Well, there is a theory that each life or incarnation is a test. Suppose one makes a serious error in one life. According to this theory, the next life is a sort of probation. If one fails to measure up in that life, he is in serious trouble.
You want to take me back over another hump then?
I suspect it might be profitable.
Wyn-No-Nah seemed reluctant.
That's a long way back. I have a feeling I may not return from one of these trips someday. Do you really think this trip is necessary?
Brandon peered into his pipe for a moment.
Don't you? After all, we have explored the incarnation rather well, and there seems to be nothing significant aside from the one major factor we have discussed.
He means me being married to my brother. There seems to be a guilt complex of some sort I have carried over into this incarnation.
Well, that seems to be the source. Of course, we all have latent factors in our personalities that may stem from repressed experiences in this life. This we can assume on the basis of fairly strong evidence. The theory of influences is, you understand, much more tenuous.
He'll go to any length to keep from saying he believes in reincarnation.
It isn't a matter of belief, really. It is a matter of evaluation. After all, we have no concrete evidence.
Wyn-No-Nah left her chair, slipped out of her jacket, and walked over to the couch.
Well, I'll see if I can't bring you a paving stone from Cusco. That would be concrete evidence.
Once the experiment was underway, Brandon became much more positive in his approach. He adjusted the lamps on Wyn-No-Nah as if setting up a portrait photograph, then flicked off the overhead lights, plunging the rest of the room into semi-darkness. Taking Wyn-No-Nah's right arm, he carefully injected a small dose of sodium pentothal.
Just enough to keep her under mild sedation.
He explained softly to Alice.
Somehow, it seems to help.
He put her under hypnosis while she stared at a shiny ballpoint pen he held. He then closed her eyes, took her into a deeper trance, and started the tape recorder. The progression backward was monotonous. At one point, Brandon asked her to describe an Oklahoma dust storm of the mid-30s, apparently out of idle curiosity. The trip back over the first hump came without incident. Almost immediately, Wyn-No-Nah's voice took on that aura of haughtiness Alice had noticed in the earlier tapes. Gradually, Brandon took her back through her life as an Inca. Alice moved closer to the couch as Brandon neared the second hump.
Now, strange as it may seem, we can go back even further. We can go back even further.
Brandon droned on monotonously.
Back even further into another life. Back to another life. Back to another life. When I next speak to you, you will be in this earlier life. You will be in this earlier life. Now you are in this earlier life.
Wyn-No-Nah's lips opened several times before she managed the word.
Water.
Brandon turned to a carafe, poured a tumbler full, arranged the bent tube carefully, and leaned over her.
You want water?
No.
She raised her hands to fend him off. Brandon put the water back on the utility table. He studied her several minutes without speaking, apparently waiting until her agitation eased some. When he spoke again, his voice was more strident, more demanding.
Where are you?
End of episode 8.